Hi Jay, I'm Chris Reed. Thanks so much for the opportunity to interview. I'm going to dive right in because I know from experience now that YouTube does not permit videos over 10 minutes. The prompt for the first question reads, which one of the following conclusions can be validly drawn from the passage? As you know, the syllogisms or short arguments that we typically see in the logical reasoning section of the LSAT have two components, the premises and the conclusion. Frequently, the premises and the conclusion appear together in the stimulus to form a complete argument. But in other cases, such as this, the stimulus contains only premises, and our job is to find a conclusion that follows from those premises among the answer choices. The stimulus here reads, only an expert in some branch of psychology could understand why Patrick is behaving irrationally, but no expert is certain of being able to solve someone else's problem. Patrick wants to devise a solution to his own behavioral problem. If there were a complete argument with premises and a conclusion, we'd want to try to anticipate the correct response before going to the answer choices. It's a little bit harder when the stimulus contains only premises, but at the very least we should try to anticipate some traps or pitfalls. Two jump out at me. One is we want to be careful about any assumptions regarding who is or who is not an expert. The other is we want to be sensitive to the distinction between solving somebody else's problems and solving your own. Answer choice A reads, Patrick does not understand why he is behaving in this way. And answer choice B reads, Patrick is not an expert in psychology. Both A and B are incorrect because we have no basis for concluding whether or not Patrick is an expert in psychology. C reads, Patrick is not certain of being able to devise a solution to his own behavioral problem. This is an apparent reference to premise number 2, but premise number 2 applies only to solving the problems of others. We have no information whatsoever regarding whether or not someone, specifically Patrick, would be certain of being able to solve his own problem as opposed to the problem of another person. C is wrong. D reads, unless Charles is an expert in some branch of psychology, Charles should not offer a solution to Patrick's behavioral problem. Again, the stimulus provides no information on whether or not non-experts should offer a solution for Patrick's problems. It tells us that non-experts will be incapable of understanding why he's behaving irrationally, and it tells us that experts are not certain of being able to solve his problem. But again, it doesn't tell us anything about whether or not non-experts should volunteer solutions. E reads, if Charles is certain of being able to solve Patrick's behavioral problem, then Charles does not understand why Patrick is behaving in this way. This makes sense. The first part of the sentence ties to the second premise. If Charles is certain of being able to solve Patrick's behavioral problem, then we know he is not an expert based on premise 2. And if he is not an expert, we know based on premise 1 that he cannot understand why Patrick is behaving the way he is. Answer choice E is correct. The prompt for the second question reads, the argument is vulnerable to criticism on which one of the following grounds? Here the prompt indicates that the stimulus contains a complete argument, couple premises and a conclusion. Premise 1 reads, knowledge of classical languages is essential for reading original classic documents. Premise 2 says, most classical documents, however, have been translated into contemporary languages, so scholars of classical history can read them for their research without learning classical languages. And the conclusion then that the author draws from those premises reads, therefore, aspirants to careers as classical history scholars no longer need to take the time to learn classical languages. This is a good example where we should try to anticipate the correct answer, and it appears that in this case, the conclusion is overly broad. Premise number 2 says that researchers can do most of their research without a knowledge of classical language, but there's at least some body of materials that will be inaccessible to scholars who do not have a knowledge of classical languages. Yet the author goes on to conclude that no knowledge of classical languages is necessary for a career as a classical history scholar. That appears overbroad. So we look at answer choice A. It concludes that something is never necessary on the grounds that it is not always necessary, and it appears that that's exactly what this argument does. It concludes that it is never necessary for a classical history scholar to have knowledge of a classical language, simply because knowledge of a classical language is not always necessary to conduct research involving classical documents. A is correct. B reads, a statement of facts is treated as if it were merely a statement of opinion. Well, treating fact as an opinion tends to diminish its evidentiary value, and here the author does just the opposite by exaggerating the evidentiary value of premise 2 and reaching an overbroad conclusion. C reads, the conclusion is no more than a restatement of the evidence provided as support of that conclusion. Well, we deconstructed the argument and pointed out that the conclusion actually goes much further than either of the premises. Therefore, the conclusion is clearly distinct from those premises, and C is wrong. D refers to the judgment of experts, but there's no reference whatsoever to third parties in the stimulus, so D is wrong. And E says, some of the evidence presented in support of the conclusion is inconsistent with other evidence provided. Well, there are two pieces of evidence provided. One refers to the language requirements for understanding original classical documents. Premise number 2 refers to the language requirements for understanding translated classical documents. Each premise addresses different subject matter, and therefore there's no inconsistency between the two. The prompt for question 3 reads, if the information above is correct, which one of the following conclusions must be true on the basis of it? This is structurally similar to the first question that we saw. The stimulus contains premises, the conclusion appears in the answer choices. The stimulus reads, 30 professional income tax advisors were given the same records from which to prepare an income tax return. The advisors were unaware that they were dealing with false records created by an investment firm. No two of the completed tax returns agreed with each other, and only one was technically correct. Again, we probably can't anticipate the right answer here because the stimulus provides only premises, but we should be aware of obvious traps. And I think the most obvious trap in this case is asking us to draw unsubstantiated conclusions from this sample of 30 income tax advisors. Note that the stimulus provides no information whatsoever on the abilities of people who are not tax advisors, and there's always a risk that the author is going to try to draw conclusions about the tax advisor population that cannot be substantiated by a sample of 30 practitioners. So A reads, only 1 out of every 30 income tax returns prepared by any given professional income tax advisors will be correct. Well, statisticians will draw conclusions or generalizations about a large population based on a relatively small sample, but you can't draw conclusions about the abilities of individual practitioners on a sample such as this involving 30 income tax advisors. That's extrapolating in the wrong direction, and therefore answer choice A is incorrect. B looks right. B reads that a tax return has been prepared by a professional income tax advisor provides no guarantee that the tax return has been correctly prepared. That's totally consistent with the information in the stimulus, where 29 of the 30 tax advisors who participated in the study failed to deliver accurate tax returns. Therefore, it is clear that the mere fact that a tax advisor prepared it does not guarantee its accuracy. C reads, in order to ensure that tax returns are correct, it is necessary to hire professional income tax advisors to prepare them. As I mentioned before, the stimulus provides no information whatsoever about the abilities of non-tax advisors, so we can't draw any conclusions about their likelihood of preparing, their ability to prepare an accurate tax return. C is wrong. D reads, all professional income tax advisors commit errors on at least some of the tax returns they prepare. Again, like A, this is drawing conclusions about individual ability and performance that are not substantiated by this sample of 30 tax advisors. And finally, E repeats the error in C by asking us to draw conclusions about the abilities of non-tax advisors, even though no information is provided in that area. Thanks so much.